Tom Cotton was in short pants when the band were last played together. I'm not sure he ever listened to the band. Good morning, Senator Cotton. How are you?
I'm doing well, Hugh. I probably was in short pants, but yeah, of course, I've listened to their great music over the years.
Senator, I just had Chris Christie on. He thinks Donald Trump can get a fair trial in the District of Columbia. I do not. You are a Harvard Law grad, and I think they taught a few things about the rules of criminal procedure there. What do you think?
Only a very few things, Hugh. And I was such an excellent lawyer, I had to quit the law and become an infantry officer, so no one should take legal advice from me. But I think if you just look at the circumstances, it's hard to see how President Trump gets a fair trial in Washington, D.C. And that's one of the reasons why Jack Smith, who is a rabid zealot, brought this case there. First off, there's very little balance in some of the nominees to that court or to the D.C. circuit because there's no senator to check them. That's where Barack Obama and now Joe Biden have reserved their most ideological nominees for, because you don't have to worry about clearing them through even two Democratic senators who might be embarrassed by their behavior or their record or the prospects of their rulings. And I think this judge, if you see how she's ruled in many other January 6th related cases or some of the rhetoric she's used or just how she's handled some preliminary motions in this case, seems to think that this is the case of her lifetime and that she's been waiting for years to get a case like this where she can be the center of attention and give the former president what he deserves. And then as a matter of the jury pool, Hugh, I mean, Washington, D.C. is obviously the most democratic jurisdiction in the country. I think they voted 92 or 93% for Donald Trump's opponents in the last two elections. And you see time and time again Republicans getting convicted by juries in that jurisdiction on extremely flimsy charges and evidence. I mean, look at what happened at Mike Flynn, for instance. So I have serious reservations about whether the former president can get a reasonable trial in that jurisdiction. And Hugh, that's to put aside the novel and untested, far-fetched legal theories that Jack Smith is pursuing. I mean, he reminds me of Stalin's chief of the secret police. Said, "Show me the man, and I'll show you the crime." I mean, he's basically saying if a politician, engages in what he thinks is misleading conduct and then acts on those misleading statements, you can charge him for a crime. Well, how about Joe Biden, who said he didn't have the authority to give away $400 billion of your money to student loan relief?
Oh, excellent example.
And then did so anyway, and then was reversed by the Supreme Court. Or for that matter, Hugh, how about Jack Smith? The last time we saw him as this rabid zealot pursuing far-fetched criminal theories against the former Republican governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell, and he got a conviction, and then it was reversed 8-0 by the Supreme Court. And do you know why it was reversed 8-0, Hugh? Because they didn't have a ninth justice to join the unanimous opinion against him.
Senator, one of the things that bothers me about Smith is that he misrepresents the law when he talks to the public. He tried to make it sound like the most recent indictment was about the January 6th riot. It's got nothing to do with the January 6th riot. It's got to do with the president's attempt to get a recount done. I don't think the president was right, correctly, former President Trump, on the law, but I don't think it's criminal. Moreover, he says he's invoking the Speedy Trial Act. The Speedy Trial Act is for the benefit of the defendant, not the prosecution. Just like the transfer of trial, Rule 21 is for the benefit of the defendant, not the prosecution. So if you're willing to misrepresent things to the public, how much do you trust the guy?
Well, no, I don't trust him at all, Hugh, given his record, going back to the McDonnell case. But as you say, when he goes out and holds press conferences, he sounds different than what he writes as an indictments, because indictments have to stand up as a matter of law, not just in front of a left-wing ideologue at the district court level, but the D.C. Circuit and then ultimately in the Supreme Court. The indictment does not charge Donald Trump with incitement or anything about the actual riot at the Capitol, because he knew that he couldn't prove that out given First Amendment defenses. So it tries to make the president's statements or legal theories, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, into crimes. Again, by this logic, why wouldn't Al Gore, or for that matter, George Bush, have been pursued in the 2000 election aftermath during the Florida recount? Or the fact that every time a Republican president has been elected this century, Hugh, Democrats in Congress have tried to block the certification of those electors. Should those Democrats in Congress have faced criminal charges as well? Again, none of this is to say that you have to agree with what Donald Trump or any of his lawyers, who the indictment identifies as alleged co-conspirators, were saying or arguing in various courts, to say that it is a very dangerous, unprecedented step to criminalize what are political differences, especially at a time when the very same Department of Justice is handling the president's own son, who is as crooked as they get, with such velvet kid gloves.
Senator, I've got David Rivkin coming up, who recently wrote a letter on behalf of Leonard Leo to the United States Senate, to the Judiciary Committee, of which you are a member, Sheldon Whitehouse and Dick Durbin specifically, objecting to their attempt to impose ethics codes on the Supreme Court and summoning Leonard Leo. I'll talk with Rivkin about that, but Governor Christie agrees with me. It is unconstitutional, straight up, for the United States Congress to attempt to regulate the conduct of Supreme Court justices. They can regulate the number of members on the court. They can regulate the appellate jurisdiction. They may not regulate the conduct of the Supreme Court, in my view. Do you agree with me and Governor Christie, or with Durbin and Whitehouse?
Well, Hugh, just as a general matter, I don't agree with Dick Durbin and Sheldon Whitehouse on much of anything. On this question, I think Chris and you have a very solid argument. Obviously, it's an untested argument, but the Supreme Court is different. The Supreme Court is a creature of the Constitution.
Correct.
It was created by the Constitution. It is a co-equal branch. John Roberts' title is not Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It's Chief Justice of the United States. Every other court at the circuit level and the district level, and specialty courts, are creatures of Congress. So different standards, therefore, presumably would apply. But as a prudential matter, simply because those constitutional questions are open, I think it is simply a waste of our time to be trying to regulate the code of ethics for the Supreme Court, which already has disclosure requirements that are very similar to what we face in Congress and that the executive branch faces. That suggests to me that what Dick Durbin is really doing is just one more effort by the Democrats to delegitimize the Supreme Court and the center-right justices there, because it is no longer a creature of the left. For 50 or 60 years, they viewed the Supreme Court as their last resort. When they couldn't win through the ballot box and legislation, they tried to win through litigation. And now that they can no longer count on it to move the court or move the country leftward, they are trying to undermine its legitimacy. It is a shame. It is a shameful thing that Dick Durbin and Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer are doing.
Senator Cotton, I want to move to the most serious issue. I think we're on the brink of a confrontation with China, which could get heated. Last week, they ran 11 ships in tandem with Russia, total 11 in the flotilla, past the Aleutians, not within our 12-mile boundary, not within our 24-mile contiguous boundary, but close enough. To me, that's an open invitation to run a strike group through the Taiwan Straits, which is also international waters. Instead, President Biden simply sent 4 destroyers up there. How weak is that?
Well, it's very weak, Hugh, but it's in keeping with Joe Biden, not just with China, but with Russia before the invasion of Ukraine, what's happening with Iran now. He doesn't want to acknowledge provocations because that would require a response. He's very similar to how Western leaders are handling Wilhelmine Germany and then Germany between the wars, not just Nazi Germany after 1933, but the Weimar Republic as well. Every time Germany took some provocative action in the lead up to World War I or World War II, Western leaders, especially in Great Britain, did not even want to acknowledge it, because to acknowledge it would require a response. That's why President Biden barely even acknowledged it. Take the balloon earlier this year. If it hadn't been for a rancher and some amateur photographers in Montana, I bet we never would have even heard of it. But every time we allow China to get away with such provocation, all we do is to invite more provocation. And to go back to the analogy of the 2 world wars, the most fundamental thing that China watches is our defense budget and our military spending. And until we are spending what we need on the things we need to fight back against China, even if the president were willing to send strike groups through the Taiwan Strait, China would still be gaining a more favorable balance of power against us in a potential conflict in the Pacific.
Last question, Senator. News stories this morning suggest another big property owner in China is going to go belly up like Evergrande, something called Country something or other, and that the deflationary cycle there has begun. They are very close to doing what we did in 2007, 2008, have a financial crisis. Do you think such a crisis would lead Xi Jinping to a confrontational stance with Taiwan or lead him away from it?
Well, I think it's hard to predict, Hugh, but it could be dangerous. It's the cornered rat syndrome. If Xi thinks his economy is about to collapse, and it could lead to significant internal discontent and instability. It's common throughout history for dictators to look outward to try to solve domestic problems. It's also simply the case, Hugh, that Xi probably sees that China is reaching the apex of its power relative to the United States, given the way it's propped up its economy for decades and its horrific one-child policy for decades. China is going to gradually start contracting, both in terms of its population, ultimately their as a economy, in the decades ahead of us. But Xi recognizes that, and he may think that the time is coming when the window is going to be at its maximal opening point for him to go for the jugular in Taiwan. That's why it's so urgent that we begin a rapid campaign of rearmament and strength and resilience towards Chinese communists.
Senator Cotton, thank you as always. Very direct, and I like that cornered rat syndrome. That sums it up. That's what I think we're facing. Thank you so much, Senator.